Okay, I'm Roger Favorite, Rogerfavorite, just like the word. And I was in the infantry, the 106th Infantry Division. And I was right out of high school into the service, drafted.
Okay. I'll ask you questions, but I don't have a mic on. So if you would just kind of remember to answer in full sentences, would you mind doing that?
All
for
right.
me? Okay. So, Roger, tell me about December 7th. Do you remember where you were? To the battle of the bombing of Pearl Harbor?
Well, at the bombing of Pearl Harbor, I was still in school, and high school. And so I do remember when that happened, I guess.
How did the information spread? Do you recall that day?
Oh, I don't recall anything specific about that. It just spread by word of mouth as far as school kids were concerned. And then we got home and learned more.
Okay. When did you decide? Did you say you enlisted?
No, I was drafted. I tried to get into the Air Corps earlier, but didn't pass all of the tests. And so I then was drafted into the service.
And so when you were drafted, did you get a choice of what you could do?
I had passed a test that was a specialized test, and that said that I might be entitled to go do some college work. And so I did then go into Vanderbilt University for 3 months, but not until I served the basic infantry basic at Fort Benning, Georgia, which was 19 weeks.
And anything stand out from that experience?
Not particularly. It was a solid basic training in infantry, all right. And then after we'd been at Vanderbilt 3 months, they closed the program. And so we then were brought into back to the troops, and I was assigned to the 106th Infantry Division and to Camp Atterbury outside of Indianapolis, near Columbus.
Tell me about when you were first deployed. Did you know where you're going? Did you know what you were going to do?
Well, when we stayed quite a while at Camp Atterbury, and then we left from the States in Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, and we didn't know what was happening. We went over and went to England for 1 month training, and then said we were to go in. The war supposedly was about over, and so they said we probably would go in and cover some territory and relieve some troops that had been fighting.
So where did you go and how?
So we went through France, just marching across France, and then went up to the Siegfried Line near the Belgian border, and we were in the German line. It had been World War I encampment, and we were there, and we replaced 2 divisions. One of them I know was the 25th Division, and so there was our division went in, and we were joked and they said, well, it's a quiet war, nothing's going on, you're just coming and we did the work and you're going to find it at ease. And it was quiet at that time.
Okay. So now set the stage for us for the Battle of the Bulge.
Well, we were there about 4 or 5 days, and all of a sudden we heard shots in the evening, and it was a rocket gun, and we learned later that was the first shot in the Battle of the Bulge. But our commander said that we should just be quiet that night because he thought maybe something was going on. They had no information really what was happening, but they felt there was some kind of push, and so we should be quiet and that the enemy might be coming through us, so to speak. And that's what happened.
So you guys had no idea this?
We had no idea really what we were headed for, and so once we were infiltrated, the next morning they said that they'd been through us, that the enemy had, and so we spent the next 4 days in getting to be smaller groups, and there were about 1,000 of us, if I may proceed to that part of it. 1,000 of us that were up on the side of a hill, and 4 days without food. Our food had been captured, the motor pool, no ammunition, no weapons, no artillery, no nothing. And so we were 4 days up there, and then we were told that the Germans had zeroed in on us and they were going to kill us if we stayed there. And the colonel came on a bullhorn and said, "I've asked the Germans if they will take us prisoner," and they said they would. And we all looked at each other in disbelief because we'd had 1 day of prisoner training in England, which we paid no attention to because we never thought that was a reasonable option. And he said, "I want to tell you that if you take you prisoner, you may stand a chance of causing more damage behind the German lines as you're in Germany, and hold up and do more good there than being dead men out front here." So he said, "That's what I'm asking you to do." And so we looked relieved, and we're told to put up our arms and put anything white in our field jacket, epaulets, and come out, and that the Germans would take us prisoner.
So was that 1,000 of you guys?
There were 1,000 of us at that point from the 422nd Regiment.
Then what happened?
And what happened? Well, the Germans then put a few guards on us and marched us, jogged us away from the front lines. And as we jogged away and went into Germany, we found that there was all of our American equipment coming at us, jeeps and all, driven by Germans. But the Germans were so low on fuel at that time, we found that they had pushed a lot of heavy weapons up to the line to go ahead with battle because they were just that short of fuel. And so then we jogged for 3 or 4 hours, and we thought, well, we're going to get tired. They're going to get tired. We'll have to stop. But lo and behold, as we went on down through the little villages, they sent out new guards and relieved the guards, and we kept jogging. But then we went to, we stopped after a few more hours in a church that had been bombed out the windows, and we got to rest on the pews. And that was the softest bed I'd had for a long time, it seemed. And so then we were up and jogging again. So we went on another few hours and came to another prison camp site, and here they said they were too full, and it was nighttime, and they said you can stay here in the compound. So it was crowded. We stayed there, and we were to go on the next day. The next day, they loaded us into boxcars, and the boxcars had been hauling cattle before that, and some of them had been cleaned out, and some had not been cleaned out too well. But fortunately, I was in one that had been cleaned somewhat. And so we went on, and there were little windows in the corner of the boxcars. They were called French boxcars. They were small, and it had barbed wire over it. And so we went on and went deeper into Germany, and we understood that it was near the Swiss border when we were still traveling. And when we get at the top of a high hill, we found out that the engineer and so forth would stop the train and had to go out in the woods and chop wood to put in for fuel. That's all they had for fuel. And then we chugged like the little train that could and go over the hill and go on our way. We finally stopped the next day. Do you want me to continue in that pattern?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
fine. And so
Okay.
did you have food and water at that time? Was there
There was nothing yet. We had nothing.
What
But-
time of year was it?
Pardon?
What time of year was it?
What time? Yeah, this was Christmas time, excuse me. Yeah, December 16th, 18th, 19th. Well, we were into near Christmas. In fact, when we were in the boxcar finally, we stopped, and one of the fellows looked out the little window up at the top of the boxcar, and he said, "Oh, they stopped us by a big quarry, deep quarry, and on the other side there's a V2 slide, which was a German rocket slide." And he said they picked an opportune spot. And I also found out that they have 3 or 4 car loads of ammunition for the front lines that they put on the back of our PW boxcars. There were 24 of us, 100 in there, we found out. and they had marked PW on the top, but they also had the ammunition trains back there. So on Christmas Eve, when we were still in the boxcars, and the tracks had been blown, a hole of them in the front, we were bombed, and we were bombed because the fellow that was the lookout saw flares put down on about a mile square, and he said, "I know what that is." He said, "We're going to be bombed. We're targets for the bombing because there's ammunition on this train." And the RAF was bombing by night and the Americans by day. And he said, "So the RAF is targeting us." They started to bomb us, and then the German guards, who were older men at that time, and they got older as the war progressed, opened the boxcars and said, "I'm going to let you out." Well, we didn't know where we could go, and some took off, but some decided that wasn't the time to do it. And so we did go back in the boxcars, and we were there another day or so before they fixed the tracks, and on we went to the next prison camp. And at that camp, we were then...
Stop for a minute.
Okay.
So the RAF did bomb you that night?
The RAF did bomb us.
Any of the train
Well,
cars?
excuse me, I should bring you up to date on that. We found that I know my captain lost his leg out, and there were about 5 fellows that were blown up just several feet from me. But 2 or 3 of us decided, are we going to go down in the quarry, or are we going to try to head for some other point? And 2 or 3 of us decided we were going to go to the highest part, because it had to be a direct hit if you got hurt, and otherwise you get hurt from fallout, if not anything else. So the risks were better at the higher level. If you went in the quarry, you'd lose your hearing. So we decided that's what we did, and that's where we did see 5 fellows being blown up. But fortunately, I only had a little bit of stuff raining on my metal helmet, and so that was it. But anyway, that's when we got back in the boxcars.
Okay, so time passed, they fixed the tracks, and you
Right, and
continued
we
on.
went on, and the next day we arrived at camp in the afternoon, and here they had the limeys, which were the British soldiers, signing up all the new prisoners. And so we lined up to get signed up. And when I went in, and I was a private, and when I went in, the British soldier said, "I'm going to make you a PFC, private first class." I said, "Oh?" "Yes, because the Germans have been allowing the Geneva Convention for World War I to prevail, and all the non-commissioned officers don't have to work for the Jerrys, the Germans. So you're going to be a PFC." So 2 of us watched what happened when the people went in, and we learned that they were stripped and given credit for all the things that were taken off of them. And then they could put their clothes back on. But we said, that doesn't sound like recovering anything that you might have of value. And I had a stainless steel watch that had been given to me, and I had a good fountain pen. I had my gold class ring and some money sewed in a field jacket. And I thought, boy, it'd be nice if I didn't have that stuff taken even. So 2 of us watched, and we got a chance to skirt the next building that was to be the search building, and went on our way. And from there, we were then put in camps that had double-deck wood bunks.
Okay, so how long were you interned?
Well, I guess, and I'll briefly catch the fact that I was there only a couple weeks, and the Russians were coming from Poland, in through Poland area, and so we had to get out. We understood there was a tunnel under the camp, but we didn't get a chance to use it, and so the Russians came through, and we marched out again, jogging again. So we jogged it some more. I figured I jogged about 400 miles in Germany, and I saw a lot of Germany. It's pretty. But anyway, we went then to the next camp, and there's where I was with in compounds, and the American compound had about 2,800 fellows in it, and we were in huge tents, 400 to a tent, and we had to lie down on our sides, and because there wasn't enough room to be flat, and you had a mucker, we called, and I don't know where the term comes from, a buddy, and the 2 of us would take the ration we got each day, which was a cup of, a canteen's worth or a mess kit, I should say, maybe, of soup made out of grass, like our bent grass, our whiter grass, better grass than the usual, and a couple little kartoffels, potatoes, half-baked, and so once in a while some little bully beef chunks that had been in the large wooden barrels that came in the wagons, and we got soup once a day, and that was our ration. So my mucker and I would take our soup, and we had made little cookers out of tin cans and made a propeller and a wooden device and used a shoestring and a pulley, and we heated up with little pieces of wood and heated up our soup for use. Made 2 meals a day out of the soup. We combined our portions, and that was it. So that was it in prison life. Of course, we did get radio reports because the fellows had rigged up a radio, and so they would say, how about a little ping pong? Someone would announce in the tent, and in case there were Germans there, they said, no, not now. Okay, ping pong. And then you'd get a report on what the war was going. And the German reports were probably even more accurate than the Americans. They were really good. The day that Franklin Delano Roosevelt died, we had a newspaper called OKEH that was printed in English for us in the prison camp, believe it or not. And it was pretty good little news script, but it had a picture of him on it and said, headline said, "World's worst enemy is dead." And I've often thought, I wonder where that copy is. These days, it was an interesting piece. And so we were there, and we would go out at night for a little water and out to an open area where there was a faucet half flowing, and you went out in the middle of the night because traffic wasn't so heavy, the lines weren't too long, and that was your water for it. We'd never had any showers. We had one shower, and as prisoners, and that was all. So we had the same clothes and everything, and no showers or anything to wash with all that time.
How were you treated?
I was never mistreated, and of course I didn't have to go work. But you know, I saw other compounds where the Russians were made to stand against the fence and freeze to death, and the Russians had to go out and work. And there were other compounds, the Italian, the French, the British, and so forth. But the American compounds, I know none of us had to work, but we were all separated, the non-coms, as it were, in this camp, and so it was not a working camp for Americans.
So there were no officers at your camp?
No, no officers.
Okay, all right. What did you do for recreation, or was there any?
Well, there was no recreation. You get out and walked some in the compound, but the compound was somewhat like Hogan's Heroes shows you. It had space between the compounds, and they had machine guns trained down those corridors. And if you decided you were going to try to get out and go to the other compound even, you had machine guns staring right at you, of course.
How was there ever a relationship between the German soldiers and I've heard stories about when the German soldiers were at various camps. My grandpa was
Yes.
a POW soldier up in Michigan.
Yes.
German soldiers, and he told me that there was a relationship.
There was a relationship. We could tell the war progressed as the guards got older and older. And the guards sometimes would see you, and you could see guards weeping. But they had their duty. And we traded with the guards because we did have occasion to get part of a parcel of Red Cross food, which we were supposed to get every week, a small carton, which we didn't. But we did get a whole little. There was a pack of cigarettes in that, and you got maybe 3 or 4 men to share a pack of cigarettes. And so you got some cigarettes. Well, we didn't use them to smoke, although the hardliners smoked and decided some died because they chose cigarettes. But otherwise, you could take the cigarettes and you could trade it with the German guards at night. You'd see if a guard looked extra fat in his coat, and you'd say, "Haben Sie Brot für die Zigaretten?" or "Haben Sie Brot für Puddingpulver?" powdered pudding, and thereby buy French loaves of bread. if you wanted to, 2 or 3. And my mucker did buy some with his gold class ring, but I decided that I was on a maintenance diet, and I decided that I wasn't going to get anything until I really was desperate, and so I felt I was holding my own as it was a low ebb. And he did that, and of course he suffered somewhat by eating the bread then, which I didn't share. I said no thanks, and then he suffered a great deal by having pains from having eaten and then having to stop again.
So now let's talk about.
So I was 4 months in the prison camp as such then.
Is your mucker still alive? Did you keep?
I didn't communicate with him whatsoever from the time that we left. I did find out he was from Detroit. He was a different personality totally than I think we would had any relationship with. So I was released by the Germans, by the Russians in prison camp who had come through as they swept through. We were near Berlin at a little town called Luckenwald, not Buchenwald, Luckenwald. And so we were 40 miles from Berlin.
And all the time you had no idea where you were, correct?
No, and my mother didn't know anything about me all the time that I was prisoner. What even happened to me that I was only missing?
Okay.
I just don't know.
Okay. All right,
Okay.
so we were talking about you knew the liberation was coming.
I knew the liberation was coming, and we knew that, and it got very quiet, and all of the German people in the area left because the Russians came through. The Russians and the Germans hated each other so much that it was all quiet around us. And so when we were in the camp about 3 days, and we decided, and the Russians came, and they said, you're free to go. And they said, we'll drive a herd of cattle into camp and you kill them and do it. But they foraged along the way. They didn't have any supplies themselves to eat with. They ate as they went. And so they said, you're free to do that. Well, after 3 days, we got tired of waiting on that. So several of us decided we were going to take off in small groups and head for Truenbretzen, about 40 miles away, where the three powers were meeting to decide who was going to go into Berlin and take what section and so on to wrap up the war. And so three of us took off. We started marching toward Truenbretzen. We were about 10 miles out, I suppose, and it was so quiet because all the Germans had taken off. They weren't around, and yet here came 2 or 3 little groups of German soldiers, some little pockets, and they surrendered to 2 or 3 groups of prisoners who had no weapons. They came and laid down their weapons and said, we're following you to the American lines. We want nothing to do with Russian. So that's what happened there. And so after the first day, I decided that we said we're going to stop and rest and go the rest of the way tomorrow. We said we're hungry, and the other 2 fellows were all city guys, and I was a country fellow. I'd grown up on the farm, and they said, what do we eat? And I said, well, I see 2 or 3 rabbits running around out here and some chickens. They had some cages that were open. And I saw some goats that needed to be milked, desperately needed to be milked. I said, I'll take care of all those things. So I dressed a couple chickens and cut them up rather haphazardly, but that was fine. And we had a chicken rabbit stew, and we had milk, goat's milk, and we saw some ersatz beans that ground on the coffee grinder. This was an officer's house that we were at. We realized that's what we were. And so we went in there. Well, needless to say, we had the best meal we'd had in a long time. We didn't do the dishes. We slept in the beds and took off, but we didn't tear up things. There was a grand piano and a few nice things. And now we knew the Russians had gotten into some places like that, and they'd really tore up Jack, but we didn't do that. And then we left, and then we got to the American lines, and we were there just a few days.
How many German soldiers had followed you?
Oh, they weren't with us. They were with some others over there, so I really didn't keep track of the number.
Okay, so then you come up, I'm sure you're happy to see other Americans.
Oh, yes.
So what was that like, and then what happened to you after?
Well, we saw several other prisoners that had come like us, you know, come into it, and they actually had to have guards on the mess kitchens there because the prisoners would break in for food. They were that hungry. But we didn't do that, and so we